Picture this. The year is 876 after Christ. We're in a world where the Mediterranean isn't the center of civilization anymore, where Rome has crumbled and something entirely different is emerging from the frozen fjords of Scandinavia. In a smoke-filled Norwegian longhouse near Trondheim Fjord, and when I say smoke-filled, I mean these weren't exactly well-ventilated spaces. Young Bjorn Ironside stands before 200 of the most fearsome warriors you can imagine. These aren't your Hollywood Vikings with polished armor and perfect teeth. These are men who smell like seal fat and wood smoke, whose hands are permanently stained with iron rust and blood. Men who've sailed across storm-tossed seas to raid monasteries in England, who've walked away from battles that would make modern soldiers wake up screaming. And right now, they're all staring at this young man holding what appears to be, well, let's just say, it's not what they expected. Bjorn cradles in his hands a throwing axe unlike anything they've seen before. It's been crafted by his father, Eirik Flamehair, a master smith whose reputation stretches from the Baltic to the Irish Sea. But this weapon weighs less than half of what a traditional Danish war axe should weigh. The handle is wrapped in leather from a white reindeer, which immediately draws snickers from the assembled raiders. Because, you see, white reindeer leather was considered almost feminine, decorative, pretty. Now, to understand what happens next, you need to grasp something about Viking society that Hollywood usually gets completely wrong. This wasn't some egalitarian brotherhood of seafaring adventurers. This was a rigid hierarchy based on wealth, family connections, and the ability to afford the best weapons and armor. A traditional battle axe required 3 pounds of precious iron, that's about 60% more metal than Bjorn's weapon uses. And iron? Iron was expensive. Iron was status. Iron was power. So when the great warrior Ragnar Wolfsbane rises from his bench, and this is a man who's survived 40 raids to England, whose very name makes Saxon monks cross themselves in terror when this living legend looks at Bjorn's weapon and declares it fit only for trimming beard hair. The entire hall erupts in laughter that you can probably hear echoing across the fjord. But here's what makes this moment so fascinating from a historical perspective. The mockery isn't just about the weapon, it's about maintaining the existing power structure. These wealthy Jarls, these established warriors, they've built their entire identity around being able to afford heavy weapons, chainmail that costs more than a farmer makes in 5 years. Bjorn's innovation threatens all of that. If a lightweight axe could be just as effective as a traditional one, what happens to their advantage? What happens to the system that keeps them on top? As the jeering continues, growing louder and more vicious with each passing moment, Bjorn's mother's words echo in his memory words that his father's wife whispered to him before he entered this hall. The gods favor not the strongest arm, but the cleverest mind. And you have to understand, in a society where physical prowess meant everything, where your worth was measured by how hard you could swing a sword or thrust a spear, this was almost heretical thinking. The taunts escalate. Warriors who've never spoken to Bjorn directly are now shouting insults about his family, his courage, his manhood. Someone throws a piece of bread at him. Another warrior suggests he might be better suited to weaving than warfare. And through it all, Bjorn stands there, holding his toy axe, feeling the perfect balance of it in his hands, knowing something that none of these laughing, jeering men understand yet. Then, in a moment that old Ingvar the Skald will later immortalize in the saga of the singing axe, Bjorn does something that silences the entire hall. He raises the axe above his head and invokes the names that matter most to these men. Odin All-Father, the one-eyed god of war and wisdom, and Thor, Thunderbringer, whose mighty hammer Mjolnir could level mountains. By the spear of Odin and the hammer of Thor, Bjorn's voice carries across the suddenly quiet hall. I swear that skill matters more than size, that cleverness trumps brute strength, and that this weapon you mock will prove more deadly than any Danish war axe ever forged. The silence that follows is the kind you feel in your bones, because in Viking culture, an oath sworn before the gods isn't just words, it's a binding contract with the universe itself. Break such an oath, and you don't just lose face, you lose your soul. Old Ingvar, sitting in the shadows near the great hearth, understands immediately what he's just witnessed. This isn't just a young man defending his weapon. This is the moment when everything begins to change. When the established order starts to crack. When innovation challenges tradition in a way that will reshape not just how Vikings fight, but how they think about warfare itself. The great jarls shift uncomfortably on their benches. The rank-and-file warriors glance at each other uncertainly, because deep down, in that part of their minds they don't like to acknowledge, they're starting to wonder, what if the boy is right? What if everything they've believed about warfare, about strength, about what makes a warrior truly dangerous? What if all of that is about to change forever? 2 years have passed since that humiliating night in the mead hall, and we find ourselves following Bjorn Ironside into the wilderness of central Norway in 878 after Christ. This isn't the manicured wilderness of a modern national park. This is raw, untamed country, where wolves still hunt in packs, and a single mistake can mean death from exposure, starvation, or worse. Bjorn has been living like a hermit, but this isn't some spiritual quest. This is the most intensive military research and development program the medieval world has ever seen, conducted by one determined young man with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Month after month, he practices with his throwing axes in conditions that would break most modern athletes. Snow up to his waist, winds that could knock you off a cliff, fingers so numb he can barely grip the axe handles. But here's where it gets really interesting from a tactical perspective. Bjorn isn't just learning to throw one axe accurately, though that alone would be revolutionary enough. He's developing what military historians today would call a 3-axe system. 1 axe in his hand, 2 more on his belt, allowing for continuous throwing and retrieval. Think about the logistics of this for a moment. In traditional Viking combat, you get 1 shot with a thrown weapon, then you're committed to close quarters fighting. But Bjorn is creating something entirely new. Sustained ranged combat capability. The breakthrough comes when he realizes that spinning throws movements he's borrowed from the ceremonial dances performed to honor Freya, goddess of love and fertility, create unpredictable flight patterns that can bypass traditional shield walls. Now, this might sound almost absurd to modern ears, but remember, Viking warfare is built around shield walls. These interlocking formations of overlapping shields have dominated European battlefields for centuries. If you can find a way around them, you've just revolutionized warfare. His first real test comes not in some grand battle, but during a holmgang duel on the island of Bjorni. Holmgang, literally island walking, is the Viking version of a formal duel, fought on a small island or marked ground, with strict rules and witnesses. Bjorn faces Eric the Stout, a warrior twice his size whose reputation for strength is matched only by his skill with traditional weapons. Picture this scene. 2 men on a rocky outcrop, surrounded by cold grey water, watched by a crowd of witnesses who've sailed from miles around to see this contest. Eric carries a massive Danish war axe that requires both hands to wield effectively. Bjorn holds his toy throwing axe in one hand, 2 more at his belt gleaming in the pale northern sun. The duel begins according to ancient custom, but what happens next shatters every expectation. From 12 paces away, an unheard-of distance for axe combat, Bjorn releases his first throw. The axe spins through the air with that peculiar whistling sound that will later give these weapons their nickname, singing axes. Eric raises his shield, but the spinning motion creates just enough unpredictability that the blade catches the shield's edge and deflects into his shoulder. Before Eric can recover, the second axe is already in flight. Before he can even process what's happening, Bjorn has closed the distance, and the third axe is finishing the job. The entire duel lasts less than 30 seconds. Witnesses later describe it as watching Thor himself hurl thunderbolts. Word spreads through the Viking trade networks faster than wildfire in a dry forest. From Hedeby on the Danish border to Birka in Sweden, merchants and travellers carry tales of the young warrior who can kill from impossible distances. And this is where Bjorn proves he's not just an innovator, but a revolutionary leader. He begins recruiting what he calls lesser sons, young men excluded from traditional raiding parties because they can't afford proper equipment or lack the family connections to join established crews. In 880, Bjorn leads his first raid to Northumbria with 30 men armed with lightweight throwing axes. Their target is a monastery defended by 50 Saxon warriors, men trained in traditional combat, wearing mail shirts, carrying heavy shields and spears. By every conventional measure, this should be a male put, slaughter. 30 lightly armed Vikings against 50 well-equipped Saxons? The outcome seems obvious, but conventional measures don't account for what happens when death arrives silently from 20 feet away. The psychological impact proves absolutely devastating. These Saxon soldiers have trained their entire lives to face berserkers in close combat, to stand firm against the terrifying Viking charge with its war cries and clashing weapons. They know how to lock shields, how to thrust spears, how to hack with swords in the bloody press of melee combat. What they don't know how to handle is warriors who kill from distance with weapons they can barely see coming. The first Saxon dies before the battle truly begins, a throwing axe sprouting from his chest like some impossible growth. The second and third fall before their companions even understand what's happening. By the time the Saxons realize they're under attack, half their number are dead or wounded, and panic spreads through, their ranks like plague. Bjorn's men don't just win, they achieve what military theorists call operational success. They capture the monastery with minimal casualties, claim its treasures, and establish a tactical doctrine that will spread across the Viking world like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. By 882, this tactical revolution has transformed naval warfare itself. During the Battle of Hafrsfjord, a sea engagement that will determine the future of Norwegian unification, Bjorn's men prove that throwing axes work even better in the confined space of longship decks than they do on land. Traditional weapons require room to swing, space to maneuver. Throwing axes? They thrive in tight quarters. King Harald Fairhair himself takes notice of these developments, though his established jarls pressure him to ban what they're calling cowards' weapons. Because that's what happens when innovation threatens existing power structures. The people, benefiting from the old system, will fight desperately to preserve it, even when the new system is clearly superior. But you can't uninvent an idea whose time has come. You can't put tactical genius back in the bottle once it's been released. And as we'll see, Bjorn Ironside is just getting started. The boy who was mocked for his toy axe is about to become the man who changes everything. By 885 after Christ, something extraordinary has happened in the Viking world. What started as one mocked young man with an unconventional weapon has become a movement that's reshaping the entire military landscape of Northern Europe. Bjorn Ironside, now known by the epithet Shield Splitter, commands 300 axe warriors from his training compound in Vestfold. And when I say training compound, I want you to picture something that would make modern military instructors weep with envy. This isn't just a place where warriors come to learn a few techniques. This is the world's first systematic weapons development and training facility. Students arrive from Dublin to Kiev, from the windswept shores of Iceland to the river trading posts deep in what we now call Russia. They come seeking something that's never existed before in human history: standardized, reproducible tactical excellence. Bjorn has done something that seems almost impossibly modern for the 9th century. He's standardized production. Working with a network of smiths across Scandinavia, he's created specifications for throwing axes that are precise down to the smallest detail. 24 inches long, 1.5 pounds weight, steel edges welded to iron cores. Every axe that bears his mark is functionally identical to every other axe. This might not sound revolutionary to us, living in an age of mass production, but in Bjorn's time, every weapon was essentially handmade and unique. The implications are staggering. For the first time in military history, you can train a warrior in one location and know with absolute certainty that his skills will transfer perfectly to any battlefield, with any regulation weapon. It's like the difference between learning to drive one specific car versus learning to drive any car with standardized controls. But the real revolution isn't just tactical, it's social. The democratization of warfare that Bjorn has unleashed is accelerating Viking expansion in ways that even he probably didn't anticipate. Farmers' sons, who were previously limited to defensive spears because they couldn't afford proper swords or axes, can now join raiding parties as equals. The old system, where wealth determined battlefield effectiveness, it's crumbling faster than a house built on sand. This brings us to the climactic confrontation that will define not just Bjorn's legacy, but the future relationship between Vikings and the established powers of Europe. In 885, Charles, the Fat King of the Franks, and quite possibly the most inappropriately named ruler in medieval history, offers £1,000 of silver to stop Viking attacks on his territories. £1,000 of silver. To put that in perspective, that's enough wealth to buy approximately 200 fully equipped warships, or to support an army of 5,000 men for an entire year. This isn't just a payment, it's an admission that the most powerful kingdom in Western Europe can't defeat these Scandinavian raiders through military force alone. The negotiations take place on the Seine River, near Paris, with both sides maintaining the careful diplomacy that characterizes these sorts of medieval standoffs. Bjorn arrives with 50 of his best axe warriors, while Charles brings twice that number of his elite guards, men wearing the finest mail armor money can buy, carrying shields that cost more than most people see in a lifetime. What happens next becomes the stuff of legend, though I suspect the reality was even more dramatic than the Platte stories suggest. During the negotiations, in what can only be described as a catastrophic failure of diplomatic protocol, Frankish guards attempt to assassinate Bjorn. Maybe they thought they could end the Viking threat by eliminating its most innovative leader. Maybe Charles himself ordered it, thinking he could get his silver's worth through treachery rather than honest payment. Whatever their reasoning, it was a mistake that cost them dearly. The ensuing battle takes place in full view of hundreds of witnesses lined along both riverbanks, merchants, nobles, clergy, common people who've come to witness this historic meeting between two very different worlds. And what they see changes everything they thought they knew about warfare. Bjorn's axes split the laminated shields of elite Frankish warriors like they're splitting kindling for a fire. These aren't crude weapons wielded by barbarians. These are precision instruments in the hands of masters who've trained for years to achieve tactical perfection. The psychological impact on the Frankish forces is immediate and devastating. Their best equipment, their finest training, their superior numbers, none of it matters against an enemy who can kill from distances they can't even comprehend. But the most dramatic moment comes when Bjorn faces his old tormentor, Ragnar Wolfsbane, the very man who first declared his weapon fit only for trimming beard hair. Ragnar has become a mercenary fighting for the Franks, probably attracted by the promise of Frankish gold and the chance to prove that traditional Viking warfare still reigns supreme. The duel that follows becomes the centerpiece of the saga of the Singing Axe. Ragnar wields a massive two-handed Danish war axe, the kind of weapon that represents everything the old Viking elite holds sacred. It's beautiful, expensive, and absolutely lethal in the right hands. Bjorn carries his toy, the lightweight throwing axe that started this entire revolution. The fight lasts exactly as long as it takes for Bjorn to make one perfect throw. His axe shears through Ragnar's supposedly superior weapon like it's made of rotten wood, then buries itself in the chest of the man who once led the mockery in that smoke-filled mead hall years ago. The symbolism is so perfect that if this were fiction, you'd accuse the author of being heavy-handed. But here's what makes Bjorn truly brilliant, as both a warrior and a strategic thinker. He understands that success breeds innovation among enemies. The Byzantine Greeks are already developing curved shields designed to deflect thrown weapons. Irish warriors are adopting lighter armor for greater mobility against these new tactics. Saxon kingdoms are experimenting with their own throwing weapons. The arms race that Bjorn started is transforming warfare across the entire continent. His response reveals just how far ahead he's thinking. Instead of trying to maintain some sort of monopoly on throwing axe techniques, he begins teaching combination methods where thrown axes create openings for traditional Viking charges. He's integrating innovation with tradition, rather than simply replacing old methods with new ones. This isn't just tactical genius, it's political genius. By showing that his innovations can enhance, rather than threaten, traditional Viking warfare, he neutralizes much of the opposition from conservative jarls and established warriors. The The throwing axe becomes not a replacement for Viking military culture, but its newest evolution. Standing on those riverbanks near Paris, watching Frankish nobles flee from a handful of Scandinavian warriors armed with what they'd dismissed as toys, witnesses are seeing the future of European warfare being written in real time. They're watching one man's humiliation transform into a military revolution that will help Vikings conquer territory from the Volga River to the shores of North America. The boy mocked in the mead hall has become the architect of an empire built on flying steel. By 890 after Christ, Bjorn's shield-splitter Ironside has transcended the normal boundaries of what it means to be a Viking warrior. He's become something entirely new in the medieval world, a living symbol of how innovation can shatter even the most rigid hierarchies. His influence now stretches across a geographic area that boggles the modern mind, from the ice-locked shores of Iceland to the vast river systems of what we now call Russia. The schools operating under his guidance aren't just training facilities, they're laboratories of military innovation, each one adapting his core techniques to local conditions and challenges. In Iceland, where survival often depends more on hunting seals than raiding monasteries, his methods emphasize the kind of precision accuracy that can mean the difference between eating and starving through a brutal winter. Swedish variants focus on forest ambush tactics, perfect for the dense woodlands, where traditional shield walls become impossible to maintain. But perhaps the most revolutionary development is happening in places like the Orkney Islands and the Shetlands, where women are training alongside men in defensive applications. Now, before you start thinking this is some sort of medieval feminist awakening, understand that this is pure practical necessity. When your men are off raiding for months at a time, the women left behind need to be able to defend their homes against retaliatory attacks. Enter Astrid Irongrip, a shield maiden whose contributions to close-quarters retention techniques will save countless lives during home raids. She develops methods for using throwing axes in confined spaces inside longhouses, in narrow passages between buildings, anywhere traditional weapons become unwieldy. Her innovations prove that Bjorn's revolution isn't just about changing how men fight, but about fundamentally reimagining who can be an effective warrior. These aren't just isolated developments. What we're witnessing is the emergence of a true military-industrial complex, centuries before anyone thought such a thing was possible. Smiths across Scandinavia are specializing in throwing axe production. Traders are establishing supply lines for the specific types of steel and leather required. Training manuals, oral traditions passed down through carefully chosen students are standardizing instruction across vast distances. The economic implications alone are staggering. Traditional Viking warfare required enormous capital investment. A fully equipped warrior needed chain mail worth more than a farm, weapons that cost as much as livestock, shields made from carefully selected wood by master craftsmen. Bjorn's system democratizes military effectiveness in a way that fundamentally alters the social structure of Scandinavian society. But all revolutions eventually face their ultimate test, and Bjorn's comes in 895, at the borders of the Danelaw, that portion of England where Viking law and custom hold sway over Saxon tradition. The Saxon kingdoms have finally organized a coordinated response to the Viking threat, and they're determined to reclaim York, one of the most important Viking strongholds in Britain. This isn't just another raid or skirmish. This is a full-scale military campaign designed to break Viking power in England once and for all. The Saxon army approaching York represents everything the old world can muster against the new. Traditional heavy cavalry, disciplined infantry formations, siege engines, and something entirely new, crossbowmen, equipped with weapons specifically designed to counter throwing axe tactics. Because here's what the Saxons have figured out, probably through bitter experience. If you can force throwing axe warriors into sustained defensive positions, you neutralize their primary advantage of mobility and range. Crossbows, with their longer range and ability to punch through light armor, represent the next evolution in the endless arms race that Bjorn started decades earlier. Bjorn himself is now 50 winters old, ancient by Viking standards, where most warriors are lucky to see their 40th year. His hair has gone completely grey. His hands bear the scars of thousands of hours of practice, and his reflexes aren't quite what they were when he first shocked that mead hall with his revolutionary weapon. But his mind? His tactical genius? Those have only grown sharper with age and experience. The final battle unfolds like something from the great sagas, except this time we know it really happened because the archaeological evidence still exists. Saxon chronicles describe the engagement, runic stones commemorate the fallen, and grave goods tell the story of warriors who died fighting with revolutionary weapons in their hands. Bjorn takes a crossbow bolt to the chest early in the fighting, a wound that would drop most men instantly. But witnesses later swear that he continued fighting for 3 hours after taking that mortal hit, his axes singing through the air in graceful arcs that poets will describe for centuries to come. 12 men fall to his throes after the bolt pierces his chest, each death a final proof that skill and innovation can triumph over brute force, even when the innovator himself is dying. The image that survives in the sagas is almost supernatural. An aging warrior, blood streaming down his chest, calmly retrieving and throwing axes with the same mechanical precision he's maintained for 30 years. This isn't berserker fury or desperate last-stand heroics. This is a master craftsman demonstrating his art one final time, even as his life ebbs away. But the real legacy isn't in how Bjorn dies, it's in what he's created that will outlive him by centuries. Fast forward 1,000 years. In modern Norway, archaeologists excavating a ship burial uncover perfectly preserved, throwing axes, their handles worn smooth by countless hours of practice. The wood shouldn't have survived a millennium, but the bog conditions created perfect preservation. You can still see the finger marks where warriors gripped these weapons, still feel the balance that made them so deadly effective. Runestones from Gotland to Greenland bear inscriptions of the triple axe symbol, marking graves of warriors who learned from Bjorn or his students. Some of these stones are in places that Vikings weren't supposed to reach, according to traditional historical accounts, but the archaeological evidence doesn't lie. Bjorn's revolution spread farther and faster than anyone imagined possible. Today, in Scandinavian martial arts schools from Oslo to Stockholm, they still teach something called Bjorn's dance movements, preserved through 40 generations that echo combat techniques developed in the 9th century. Modern practitioners probably don't realize they're performing kata that originated with a mocked young man holding a toy axe in a smoke-filled mead hall over 1,000 years ago. The boy who endured humiliation for carrying a weapon fit only for trimming beard hair became the father of a military revolution that helped Vikings establish kingdoms from the Volga River to Vinland in North America. His innovations contributed to Viking raids that reached as far as Constantinople and Baghdad, expeditions that brought Scandinavian warriors into contact with civilizations their ancestors never dreamed existed. In the end, Bjorn Ironside proved something that military theorists still study today: that, in warfare, as in life, innovation will always triumph over tradition when the innovator has the courage to endure mockery, the persistence to perfect their craft, and the vision to see beyond what currently exists to what might be possible. The singing axes fell silent centuries ago, but their song echoes still in every garage inventor who dares to challenge conventional wisdom. Every startup founder who believes they can build something better than what came before. Every individual who looks at an established system and asks the most dangerous question in human history: what if there's a better way? That question, first whispered in a Norwegian mead hall in 876 after Christ, changed the world. And it's still changing the world today.